It's a brand new year and the kids are back in school, so we thought, why not kick off with the topic of education? Now, in terms of bragging rights, Singapore has a lot to be proud of. We out of 81 countries, Singapore stands right at the top of the table. I'm talking about Pisa. This is the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment. It measures 15-year-olds' ability to use their reading, mathematics, and science knowledge and skills to meet real-life challenges. Well, at least that's what it says on the website. But today, we want to examine and challenge the importance of those metrics, especially in a world where social, emotional, perhaps creative skills are more important, perhaps even more important than some of these other metrics, where you can learn how to code on YouTube, AI can give you answers to formulas, and knowledge can simply be found just a few clicks away. So yes, Singapore is top of that list, but does it mean we are ready for this brave new world, a world of the unexpected? Okay, so Singapore pulls in as the top performer for reading, mathematics, and science. Wei Li, for a start, perhaps you can help explain to us, why are we still measuring how well 15-year-olds fare in these three areas, and why is it seen as a good measurement of one's ability?
There are some fundamentals that are quite key to be able to keep learning. And reading, I think nobody is going to argue that's important. If you can't read, you are not able to continue learning throughout the rest of your life. So it is a good measure for everyone, not just in Singapore. Mathematics, literacy, you definitely need it to be able to compute, to be able to add on in terms of the technological advancements and developments. So mathematics is another core fundamental that we need. Science is critical to how we have new developments, new scientific discoveries, how we advance, how we improve our community, how we improve our world. So that's another core fundamental. So tracking these three areas will help us to understand whether our fundamentals are still strong, our foundations are still strong, of which we can build further from it.
But one could argue that while these three areas are important, they're not the only basis for one's ability. And increasingly in a world that has changed so much, where, social skills are very important, the ability to think out of the box, to be flexible and react to changing situations, these would be perhaps maybe even more important in some respects. Jason, what do you think?
Well, I think that one plus of these sorts of periodic ranking tables is they provide us with, I suppose, snapshots in time, as it were. But at the same time, I would urge some degree of caution. In other words, I'm talking about intelligently interpreting these sorts of league table results. Because, for one thing, Singapore has decided to move away, quite wisely in my opinion, from an excessive focus on ranking tables. Remember, at one time, the schools, the secondary schools and JCs were ranked, and that's been done away with. So I would urge some degree of caution when we try and think about, this kind of rigid hierarchical ranking of countries. It's as though, and these sorts of numbers tend to take on a life of their own.
Yeah. Does it, in fact, perhaps give people, mislead people to a certain degree? Because we end up thinking, hey, we're really good in all these areas and we're pretty good in the education field, but maybe we're not so great.
Well, one of the limitations of these sorts of tables is they invariably rely on quantitative indicators, as they need to, I guess. And that means that very complex educational and social phenomena tend to be reduced to single numbers.
Right.
So, very often policymakers, I guess, tend to get either elated or very upset when these sorts of ranking table results are released every few years. But really, they need to bear this point that I've just raised in mind, that there's much more to education and educational quality and these sorts of phenomena than just those numbers that we see in the tables.
So I guess it helps give some indication, but it shouldn't be the only tool of measurement. Would you agree, Ian? How do you feel about such rankings?
I think the ranking is a really good snapshot, right? Firstly, I think it tries to be objective, and it lets us confirm that our education system has this rigor, right, over the years, because the results are there for people to see, right? Quantitative data does demonstrate a confirmation of what we've been excelling in all this time. And going back to what you mentioned about creativity, thinking out of the box, I also believe that you need to have a strong foundation in knowledge and fundamental skills in math, science, and reading in order to be creative. So I'm teaching creative courses at the university, right? Creative advertising, creative design, and so on. And one of the most important criteria to do creative work is to have a store of knowledge and understanding of the world. And when you are proficient in reading, especially reading, you are able to explore the realms of knowledge out there and not be confined to very small bubbles of information. You have a better chance of coming up with creative input. Right. So this is how I see the numbers versus the abstract idea of creativity.
But I have to challenge you on the store of knowledge, because I would argue that in this day and age, especially with AI, I don't need a store of knowledge in that sense. I instead need all the tools to be able to access the knowledge, because no one can have such a plethora of information. And, in this day and age, do I really need to memorize all these facts when I can just search them online?
So let me challenge you back, right? I also teach people how to upskill in AI. And the first thing I tell every class is that you need to be a subject matter expert in order to wield AI tools well. Because you need to be able to analyze and evaluate the outcome. What AI has generated, is this good or bad? Is it right or wrong? Right? Without that store of knowledge, you cannot assess the outcome. So AI tools, they shorten the time that we need, that we use to achieve outcomes, but it does not replace the need for a human to have a basis of knowledge and to make an evaluation.
The basis of knowledge, yeah, I agree. I mean, I need to have some idea how things work so that I can evaluate whether what is being returned to me by AI is actually accurate or not.
Yes.
But at the same time, I don't really need to know it all. Instead, I need to know how to ask questions. What I've learned is know how to ask the AI so that I can get the information. Is this something that, we could teach in our schools, that we should be looking to perhaps find a way to even measure the ability of our kids moving forward, Wei Li?
Oh, Stephen, I just wanted to get back to Pisa. Not that I want to defend the instrument, but just to let you know that it's not just a one-dimensional view of knowledge. It is actually in evaluating the skills, the depth of skills that students have. So, for example, reading, it's also going into inference, reading between the lines, being able to have media literacy. So it is beyond very simple skills. It goes on into complex proficiency as well, for mathematics as well as for science. So we actually mine further into the individual skill sets that the test is able to give us. But you're right in that it is only one measure and it's insufficient. So we will have to develop other ways and find other ways to be able to see whether our students have got the range of competencies, whether it's communication skills, whether it's in being able to read body language, whether it's being able to work together with other people, which some of these instruments will not be able to measure. So it is only one aspect of it. But getting back to your question about whether we are giving our students more data literacy and maybe even AI literacy, since now it is giving us that big shift in being able to learn to work as well as to execute some of our daily requirements. So indeed, our teachers are using it, our students are using it, we're not flinching from it. And we're still exploring ways to do it. So for example, we have 3 areas in which we use AI in our system now. One is for learning mathematics. So it is actually a system in which our students can use to learn mathematics. We also use it as a feedback assistant tool. So for example, if you give a short answer, it is able to mark for you. That gives you instant feedback, so that students are a little bit more motivated to be able to tackle it, because they see immediately whether the answer meets the certain requirements. It also allows them to learn English better, because there's a quick feedback about their English capability. So, for example, I just went into a class the other day and they were learning about persuasive writing. And they actually plugged their writing into ChatGPT and with prompts, and they're learning how to use better prompts, ask ChatGPT to improve their essay.
Okay.
And they take a look at how it improves their essay and get their peers to be able to comment on it as well. So, I mean, that's an interesting way of using it.
Yeah, definitely. But again, it still sounds like much of it is being used to measure more academic ability. I'm asking about the soft skills, the parts that we can't, some of the EQ that sometimes is a bit hard to teach per se, but through the methods of the way teachers teach, the way classes are run, kids learn from that. How do we impart these soft skills to prepare them for an environment that could be unexpected? In fact, we don't even really know what the jobs of the future might be. Is this something, is PISA still a good indicator of where we stand, or should we also be looking at other indicators? And how do we broaden that scope to allow us to have a better understanding of where we really stand?
Okay, one of the test was on collaborative problem solving. So they had a very creative way to be able to allow a few people inputs to work together. And so to our surprise, our students did quite well there too. And our students didn't know anything about the test. So what we're doing in schools is beyond classes that you see preparing for academic exams. That's the value of our co-curricular activities, our CCAs.
Yeah.
When you collaborate together, when you organize something, when there's leadership opportunity, when you're going out into the community to help them in certain ways, that's where you practice your EQ.
Ian, what do you think?
It could be assignments, it could be projects, it could be in-class exercises. This would allow them to encounter situations where they have to exercise their soft skills and learning how to interact and to collaborate. And sometimes, and always dealing with conflict. There's always going to be conflict anywhere that you go, right? And how do we measure the outcome? I think it's kind of difficult, but I think more important is the experience that they go through, and also giving them the feedback along the way on how to mitigate these situations. Empathy needs to be built through putting people in new situations, role modeling, and just getting people to interact more with each other rather than just looking at their phones.
That one is a whole different discussion for another day, I think. But experiential learning is so important. And in fact, I recall to my time in school, I never fared well in our system because I was not very good at memorizing facts. I went to the normal stream after PSLE. I fortunately got back to the express stream in Sec 2, but then in JC, I repeated my first year again. On hindsight, I realized I had learned so many life skills from those failures, what we would consider failures here, kindness, generosity of certain teachers, empathy, all these things that I don't think I would have learned if I had just gone down what we often term here like a scholar route and just been straight A student all the way, So how can we sort of encourage our children while we don't want them to fail? How do we allow them to be exposed? Because school is the safest place where you can fail, so to speak, where the consequences aren't severe. I mean, Jason, do you see teaching in Singapore here evolving to a point where we can, how do we make this part of the curriculum, so to speak?
Well, I think the schools are in the midst of a very exciting period of transition, really, because the Ministry of Education's actively trying to encourage this concerted move away from a very, if you like, entrenched way of viewing education, what education is primarily for, which is to score well in exams in order that you get a degree, get a prestigious job and a secure future. So the thinking goes. So it's not going to be easy, but I see this sort of transition making headway, really. And it's not going to take place overnight because we're talking about, I guess, structural changes, such as the changes in the PSLE scoring system, as well as at the level of practice in the classrooms and in the schools. For example, the idea that teachers ought to role model the sorts of values and attitudes and behaviors for their students. And in a way, I guess that these sorts of values or attitudes or behaviors are not only explicitly taught by teachers, but very often students, if you like, catch these sorts of attitudes merely by observing how the grown-ups and their peers interact, how people behave in the school. Because very often it's not the explicit messages that the adults in their lives try to send to them, but it's also at the same time all these hidden or implicit messages that they pick up.
So on the flip side, what about parents? How do we? Is that another obstacle? Ian, what do you think?
So I've tried to be the best parent to my kids by not setting expectations in many ways, right?
Okay.
And I think in hindsight that was really good, because we discovered that, like, my two kids, they are very different, right, in aptitude, in their interests and so on. So I've never told them that, okay, you must go this route, please be a doctor, please be a lawyer, and so on. My mum treated me the same way. She did say, please try to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. It didn't work out, right? I went my own way, and that's how I got into journalism in the first place. And so with my kids, I have always told them, you make the decision and you have to live with it, so that you don't blame me later. Because at the same time, I've also seen other kids grow up and being very resentful of the path that their parents encourage them to go on, right? And I thought I didn't want that for my kids. So I think now, as my kids go from being a teenager to adulthood, they're facing the challenges of this transition, and even working part-time or full-time, they're encountering it. This is where I say as little as possible, but I tell them, hey, if you have any questions, just let me know, because I don't want to influence how they perceive the world. I want the world to come to them in all its rawness and let them figure it out, while being supportive in the background.
So don't sort of be overprotective of our kids.
Yes.
A certain level of independence on their own, where they can be discovering, making the mistakes by themselves to not.
Yeah. So I think another thing I want to add is that our education system, for all the good changes that have happened over the years, I'm sorry to say, but I think the parents are often the first sort of layer that we need to deal with to change how they view education. And that maybe the world has changed. It's no longer what it used to be when they were starting out in school or at work.
I agree with you. Let's ask the educators on the other side of the sofa.
I think every parent wants the best for their children. And a Singaporean parent is very invested in education, which is a good thing. But we probably need a slight change in how they approach.
What kind of change?
I really like Ian's approach to parenting, which is to give space to the child to be able to go through the process of learning. Because when you learn, you will make mistakes, and you learn from the mistakes. But if you pounce on every single mistake and expect too much, too soon, too quickly, the child will be worried and scared, and that performance anxiety will follow them for quite a while.
But do we allow that here in our culture, where we're always looking, you got to be top scorer, it's always about being top of the class?
So we do need to change. I think everywhere, both our teachers, we need to give them space as well to be able to teach. And that's why we removed the mid-year exams, so that they have more space to explore, to do more of this project work, to do experiential learning, to be able to work in groups, for students to teach one another, for students to blunder a little bit and then figure it out, and that the exams are only a way of snapshotting how much you learn now, and to give you an idea of where your strengths are. So if you see that in perspective, then you won't be so worried about
But at the same time, I have to ask you, very often come exam time, suddenly all the CCAs stop. No more sports, everything's just stopped for the next few months because it's exam time.
Well, we will hope to have other ways in which our students will be able to experience. So there could be a season. I mean, just like there's a sports season, right? There's some times where you do need to hunker down. But yes, you're right in that we shouldn't see CCAs too early, so that we have more time for us to be able to experience that on the playing fields as well.
There was a recent story that came out soon after the Pisa study report was out that about half of Singapore parents ask about kids' schoolwork at least weekly, below global average. That was the headline on Today. I was shocked when I saw that. I was thinking, great, parents not asking about their kids' homework, but it was a negative. It was the angle was that it says parents are not, hunkering down and sort of watching over their kids enough. So why do we have that impression? Should we not, as Ian was saying, give them that independence to go and figure things out and have that free play?
Yeah, I don't want to look at my kids' homework. I never did.
Yeah, I always get scolded by my wife. You don't know what your kids are doing? I said, not really. So yeah, isn't it a good thing that parents are not so heavily involved in their children's education? Because otherwise it'll be like PSLE, people say, I'm taking the year off. What do? I sit at home and say, did you do the 10-year series? Did you do that assessment? And I think it ends up being worse.
So, Stephen, I was also a bit puzzled about that. So I went down to take a look at what the question STEM was asking the students. And it was, do your parents take an interest in what you are learning? So when we looked at all the Asian education systems on PISA, they all scored lower on that. So I suspect that it could be because the parents are interested, but they're showing their interest in other ways.
More
right?
tuition.
I hate to speculate what it might be. But so maybe there's something that we can learn from that. Take an interest in what your child is learning. Not ask them, what is your score on that test, but to ask them, how have you been working with your friends on this project? Right? So what excites you about school today?
Okay. And
what question did you ask? Yeah.
Not so much about, did you do paper 2 from this lesson on syllabus, whatever, right down to that detail. Yeah, I mean, because it can be, I guess we forget that kids today also are quite different, and I guess we all grew up in a time when a lot of it was sort of drilled down. But over the years, there has been that shift. So what would you say is the fundamental thing that we need to sort of solve moving forward? We're at a crux where a lot of the world is changing, but it feels like parents perhaps sometimes are holding the kids back. Kids may feel restrained by either the school, the system, but also from their parents. If you could each share, what do you think would be key to helping us move forward to embrace this brave new world, so to speak? Jason?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the need to take a serious look at what education is all about at a very fundamental level. I talked about that a little earlier on. And is it just about this very utilitarian kind of approach where you have to do well at any cost in order to acquire as many credentials as you can, and there's supposed to be this linear sort of relationship that's at play. Yeah? So the acquisition of as many credentials as possible is supposed to secure the rest of your life. And probably that's not really the way to go heading forward. There's much more to education than just the acquisition of credentials. There's so much more to life. I mean, one thing that springs to mind is, I guess, this enthusiasm for learning, not just to get promoted at work, not just to change jobs, but just learning about life, learning about oneself, learning about the world at large. So if I had one big wish, I would wish for this kind of fundamental re-evaluation of the very purpose of education, with very strong emphasis on developing this enthusiasm and constant joy of learning throughout one's life.
Right. So almost a joy for life and a joy for learning. So you're always curious, really.
Just wanted to add further to what Jason said, which I totally agree. But school really is definitely not for credentialing. It is for you to learn the values, the skills, the dispositions, competencies that you need for life. That's the most fundamental thing, and to learn how to make friends also that you carry through life. And that's why school is beyond an exam. You have a full school experience, which includes your co-curricular activities, it includes your leadership opportunities, it includes your even your time spent in the canteen, right, making friends, or playing after school with your friends. So it includes all that. That is the entire school curriculum. But one new thing that I think we're quite excited about moving forward is bringing in partnerships to the school, which I think is very helpful, because that's a bit about bringing the world into the school so that our students are prepared for the world. And we're seeing companies being more excited and more interested in working and partnering with our schools to offer these real life experiences for the students to understand and work through some authentic problem that might be in the workspace. And these are parents themselves too. So I think that it's a positive. They do it through their applied learning program. They do it through design thinking. And these are very worthwhile programs and projects that the students are doing now.
So is that the direction that we'll be taking in terms of how syllabus change in the education?
Yes, so every school now has got an applied learning program, which the students will carry out over a few hours per year.
Will we ever have a day where we can even give a grade for participation? I remember doing that at university. I joined classes which had a 20% of my grade was based on participation. So just by showing up in class, I already had some marks. I mean, of course, I took part too. But it encourages interaction. I think it encourages one to speak up, to be involved, because for very often we're just there listening, taking it in. I find our kids don't want to speak up, to share their thoughts or their opinions.
So we want to encourage more intrinsic motivation in learning. So we don't need to grade everything. That might sometimes take away the joy of learning when you have a grade, when it becomes high stakes, high pressure. And certainly we are trying to encourage our students to speak up a lot more and hear the student voice. It's not just in applied learning programs or in CCAs, but it's also in everyday classes. And so we've got to create more space for that to happen. And our teachers will be undergoing training to be able to have those kind of pedagogies in the classes.
Ian?
Yes. I agree with Jason on sparking curiosity, lifelong learning. And one concept that I hope we can consider is the concept of apprenticeship. And this is a very ancient concept, right, through the millennia. For example, for thousands of years, people have learned from great teachers through this apprenticeship process. And in places like Germany, right, young people have to do apprenticeships before they can start full-time work. I think that was the system. And this idea of apprenticeship is, for example, can we find people, older people, working people that young students can buddy with, can shadow at least for 1 or 2 weeks in a year, and to understand what life is in the real world. And there's so much wisdom that working adults can pass down to them, right? So it goes beyond the school environment,
right.
And it's really about developing mastery of hard skills and soft skills, right? I think this is the value of apprenticeship, but this word is not very often used these days. So I hope we can consider something like that.
Yeah, and I think many young ones, I mean, often we do get students writing in to us saying, can they come and shadow us for a day or two? You know, and I think it's great because if they want to, there's that interest from the student itself first. It wasn't a top-down approach. But I think, you know, there's still some way to go. And I think in the education space, we all know whether you're an educator or a parent, there's always room to grow and to improve. So thank you all for coming in and sharing your thoughts. I think we're all on the same page. I once heard this quote which said, the mind is not just a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be ignited. So as Jason mentioned, I think we want to light that fire within each of our young ones to be curious, to learn, to be eager to find out more, and to just go out there and to experience life. Because so much of what we do in life and we discover in life later on is stuff that we can't really learn through books. Thank you all for listening. If you haven't yet followed us, please do. This podcast is on Spotify and Apple and also on YouTube. And Heart of the Matter is brought to you by a great group of people here, Tiffany Ang, Joanne Chan, Saya Win, and Crispina Robert. And I'm Stephen Chia signing off. See you next week.